Oop. We are live on YouTube. Happy Monday, my friends. Let's get Instagram all set up here too. All right, I think we're good to go. All right, we are live. Happy Monday, my friends. Welcome, welcome. We're going to be talking about the post of today. Post of today. Really, the biggest reason, hidden factor, I should say, behind blood sugar crashes, right? And this will be a series that we do, really leading into our program called Mineral Mapping coming up, starting October 6th. If you want more information on that, just DM me. But we're going to do a 2 week series of this, talking about the ways in which nutrients like minerals can be very helpful for a variety of different reasons. One of the reasons that we'll be talking about today is blood sugar crashes, right? And there is a big hidden factor that many people don't recognize. Ultimately, a lot of times when someone is experiencing a blood sugar crash, and what I mean by that really is when you don't eat for maybe an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, doesn't really matter. And you feel more hangry, anxious, lightheaded, dizzy, have heart palpitations, feel more moody, for example, all of those symptoms leading into having more anxiety around food, having more anxiety around having like stressors or exercises, because all of those things can kind of exacerbate the crashes. And so you're always kind of in that like reactivity mode where you're always trying to manage your blood sugar, right? It's kind of like that type of a thing. And there's really, in all my years of doing this, there's really one main factor. I mean, there's several different things. Of course, it never just boils down to one thing, but there is one biggest thing that we see with all of these clients that we work with that are dealing with these crashes. And that biggest thing is calcium, specifically excess calcium. And you're not going to see this on blood work. Like if someone was experiencing hypoglycemia and constant crashes and they checked their calcium on blood work, they wouldn't see a high calcium. Like this isn't really a territory where you'll see it being shown up abnormal on blood work, and many times it'll look quite normal. But what we see with clients that we run like HTMA with, which is a hair tissue mineral analysis test, it really shows what's going on at the cellular level, which is where all the action takes place, and really where all the important variables are for someone who is experiencing hypoglycemia, because it might not show up as high or low numbers. It could very well, but typically that's a later stage, right? Typically, it will show up at the cell level before it shows up at the bloodstream level, right? And so, what I mean by that, when it's showing up at the cell level, you might have symptoms, but may not be able to validate those symptoms with like an off glucose level, an off A1C level, an off insulin level. Those come a little bit later, right? And so, there are two reasons why calcium can really have quite an impact on your ability to prevent those crashes, right? And I kind of think about it like this: when we have too much calcium, it's almost like a brick wall gets put in between, our cells. And so we can't quite get nutrients in, specifically glucose, in a quick and efficient manner. And when that is the case, right, all of the actions that our cell needs to perform and function needs glucose or a steady supply of energy. And when it doesn't have that, then it becomes very challenging to feel good, put plainly, right? And essentially it creates like an energy deficiency at the cell level. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means those crashes that we're talking about. It means the dizziness, the lightheadedness, the mood swings, the anxiety, right? All of those things happen when we don't have energy. And calcium, when it's too much, essentially is that brick wall that prevents that glucose from getting into the cell and basically fixing that crash. And how do we know that? Well, we know that because whenever somebody eats, especially when it's a little bit more carb based, temporarily at least, they fix that crash and they feel better, right? So essentially, it's stopping that glucose from getting to the cell where we can fix that energy deficiency. Now, number two, when that is the case, when we're not quite able to get energy in a consistent manner from that glucose, ultimately what ends up happening is our body becomes more reliant on insulin. And insulin is a hormone that helps us to lower blood sugar, of course. But when we rely on it too much, what ends up happening is our blood sugar spikes, we release a ton of insulin, and that insulin really drops us, tanks our blood sugar to the point where we're going low. And the client that we'll talk about a little bit today, she was experiencing the numbers being high and low, where her blood sugar would spike into the 200s and then would quickly drop down into the 40s, right, shortly thereafter the meal. And so she had a combination of both of these going on. One where the glucose wasn't getting to the cell as effectively, leading to those symptoms. But also, two, she was crashing on the back end of that because her body was releasing a lot of insulin in response to the meals, and particularly when someone is eating carbs, right? That tends to happen a little bit more. And so you'll tend to get symptoms like the sluggishness, the fatigue, the sleepiness that most people associate with like high blood sugar, maybe feeling more thirsty, maybe having to pee more frequently. That can certainly take place. And then the low symptoms on top of that, the feeling weak, shaky, dizzy, lightheaded, brain fogged, right? That the hangry, like I talked about, those types of feelings can come up. Now, I think the question remains like, why does this happen? Like, how can someone have or get high calcium levels? Because it doesn't come from diet. It doesn't come from dairy, eating too much dairy. It doesn't come from eating too much seafood or leafy greens or any food that has calcium in it. It comes from two different sources typically that we see. Two of those sources can be one supplemental in nature, where we're maybe taking the wrong supplements, especially that our body specifically doesn't need, right? And then number two, it comes from stressors, and we can kind of combine this all together. This can be traumas, this can be a heightened stress response, this can be blood sugar imbalances. All of those together can create this high calcium. We'll go into a little bit more detail here with this client because she was experiencing the spikes and crashes, like I mentioned, the symptoms, and she was eating clean, she was living healthfully, but it just wasn't improving her symptoms. And so we ran a HTMA on her. And we won't talk about all of the HTMA because this we'd be sitting here for 8 hours. But I'll talk about one facet of that. And what we found within her HTMA was her calcium was quite high. Normally on an HTMA, where you want your calcium to be is around like a 42, and hers was a 586, right? So big difference. 42 normal, 586 where this client was, and that's not out of the ordinary. I will say that's probably the highest that I've ever seen, because typically we see it, at least being significantly above 100 for most people with hypoglycemia, but hers was very, very high, right? And when that's very, very high, there's like no way you're going to prevent the hypoglycemia, no matter how healthy or how great that you're living. You really have to address that mineral imbalance to really correct that, right? And so where we found that what was causing that really for her was one supplemental in nature, kind of like I talked about. This is a little bit more nuanced, but she had bariatric surgery, so she was prescribed a protocol of supplements from her doctor, and this is totally standard of care, where she got a calcium supplement and a vitamin D supplement. And it's not necessarily that those are bad in themselves, because when we look at bariatric surgery, you kind of take out a portion of your stomach in a sense where it's not being used, right? And so that affects, of course, mineral absorption, particularly things like calcium and vitamin D. The problem is that oftentimes, protocols aren't people. And just because that there's research associated with someone having calcium deficiencies or vitamin D deficiencies when someone has bariatric surgery doesn't mean it's, for that specific client, that's what they need. And so a good way to test what we really need is to look at, something like the HTMA that can tell us a little bit more. And so For her, it was about, finding a little bit more balance with the vitamin D, finding a little bit more balance with the calcium. For most people, since this is a medical decision, you want to talk with their doctor, right, to make sure that you guys are on the same page. But from a strictly mineral perspective, the vitamin D wasn't helping her, and you can get that from different ways outside of just diet, mainly the sun, right? And then number two, the calcium was just way too much for what her body need. And if I had to guess, even if she didn't take the vitamin D or calcium supplements, she probably would have had high calcium just based on her lifestyle, which we'll get into in just a second. But by addressing those and looking at the minerals that her body was missing, things like boron and vitamin K2, dietary calcium, dietary magnesium, all those different things helped her body to manage that calcium better so it wasn't shooting so high, right? So that's number one. Number two, what we also looked at was her high stress response, right? Because if we look at the person behind a high calcium, it's not the calcium, it's the problem. It's the way that we're living. It ends up leading to a higher calcium level, which ends up leading to, of course, the blood sugar crashes, right? And so how we learned about our client is, obviously she got into our program. We started asking questions in some of her background, her routines, some of the things that she's done in the past, and it became very clear very quickly why this was the case for her. She had a background of over exercising, being on a carnivore diet, taking medications that were more so stimulants, living on a caffeine or energy drinks to kind of get her through the day. So she's kind of like, in a sense, driving her car 150 miles an hour without oil and gas in the engine, right? So sooner or later, that in a sense is going to blow up on you, where you're getting those symptoms, and it's going to show up in your body, right? Well, when we have a high stress response, our body tends to break down bone, which is our biggest source of calcium, and that releases into our bloodstream, right? And it gets picked up on, things like the HTMA. And so it was really about helping her body reduce that stress response so that she can conserve more of that calcium for her bone instead of releasing it so much to the point where it kind of hinders her ability to, of course, balance her blood sugar. So that was number two. Number three, blood sugar imbalances, right? Whenever we have those swings in blood sugar, we're spiking, we're crashing, we're spiking, we're crashing. That takes a lot of insulin, right? And to make insulin, our body needs calcium. And so, for all the clients that are having those types of reactions, we see a higher calcium because, automatically your body just needs more calcium to produce the insulin that you need to keep your blood sugar in range, right? So, what we want to do is stabilize that blood sugar, therefore requiring less insulin, therefore requiring less calcium, and therefore being able to stabilize our blood sugar more significantly. And that's what we did, being the entrepreneur that she was, being, go, go, go mode all day long, right? Rarely prioritizing her needs throughout the day. It caught up with her at some point. And so when you have the combination of that, plus the minerals, plus the supplements, it leads to this perfect recipe where you get these crashes. And so just by addressing each of these three areas over the last 3 weeks, she's seeing more blood sugar stability than she ever has, right? And she's feeling 75% better just in 3 weeks. So it's amazing. And the one thing that really speaks to that is she's tolerating more carbohydrates that she previously reacted to, right? One example of that is when she was eating pancakes, for example. And pancakes, I will say they're not obviously the most health conscious type of carbohydrate, but I love pancakes, right? Every now and then, pancake is awesome. But they are, grain based carbohydrates that, especially if you're pairing them with syrup, they're going to, lead to a quick rise in blood sugar, right? Well, previously she was spiking into the 200s and then dropping into the 40s. Now she's rising a little bit, but there's no crash, right? So you can tell like the carb tolerance is really, really starting to improve. And that's just in 3 weeks. In the next, 5-ish months, I'd be curious to see where she's at, because for the clients that we work with, they see the full resolution of that, where they're tolerating carbs, they don't get the spikes and crashes, they don't even have to check their blood sugar because they know it's within range. So really happy for her, because it's been a long journey, as it has been for many of the clients that are experiencing this level of crash, right? So these are the kinds of things that, just by addressing the minerals and balancing those more effectively, it can lead to very significant results where you're stabilizing your blood sugar more, you're not getting symptoms, you're tolerating carbs better, you're having more freedom, you're feeling more calm, right? You're feeling less anxious, less moody. So, really significant pieces. And I call that resilience, right? One of the biggest things that clients need to stabilize their blood sugar for good, no matter what they're eating, whether carbs or dessert or pizza or whatever it is, you know, being stuck in a stressful environment or exercising, they need resilience. And minerals are the things that helps us to give that, plus a lot of other things as well, because crashers are just one piece of that, right? So huge for her. And we'll be going over several other examples of this, but I just wanted to highlight one example of that we'll be discussing more in detail and applying, of course, more in detail in our mineral mapping program. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that gave you more perspective on things like minerals, because calcium is a healthy mineral. Like, don't get me wrong. It's just when it's high, right? It's out of balance. That's where it becomes more harmful, more difficult to stabilize our blood sugar and to feel good, right? So we'll be talking more about this in the coming lives. Let me know if you guys have any questions down below, and we will look forward to touching base on the next live. Take care, guys.